Okay. Well, and here's Melissa Ann. She could take over, but thank you all for coming tonight. We're so lucky to have Reverend Eileen Jewell here. But before the introductions of Reverend Jewell, Cindy Colton's going to give us devotion.
So I apologize for the confusion because I had already volunteered to do it last month, but then last month was canceled, and that one would not have worked this month. So today I did another one. Here we go. And part of this is dedicated to Reverend Jewell because she's from Florida. This one, and if some of you do not like baseball, I totally understand, but this one's called What Baseball Can Teach Us About Faith. And this is taken, well, we have big baseball in our family because my son-in-law is the assistant GM for the Pirates, the most losing team right now in the major leagues. But, these things come and go. Anyway, a fresh approach to Easter uses an unexpected perspective. Major League Baseball and Easter are a perfect match. In football, the object is for the quarterback to hit the receiver with deadly accuracy with short bullet passes and long bombs. In baseball, the object is to go home and be safe. George Carlin and many others talk about the spiritual side of baseball. Baseball has much to teach us about Easter. For example, in baseball and Easter, there is always a jeering crowd. We all know this from Good Friday. We also know it in our own lives. There will always be people in the world who prefer jealousy over joy. There are always people who would rather tear us down than build us up. Another lesson, we do not play alone. In baseball and life, we are always surrounded by our team. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Hebrews 13:5. It is just sometimes we miss it. Sometimes we forget about the power of the team, the risen Christ who plays with us, around us, and for us. Anne Lamont, one of my favorites, inspires us with another spiritual lesson about baseball. Grace bats last, she says. In baseball, people would say, grace bats last. Grace bats cleanup. The cleanup batter is always the fourth one in the lineup. The aim is to get the first three batters on base. Then, with the bases loaded, the strongest hitter steps up. When we're surrounded by doubters, the bases are always loaded, and we find ourselves facing curveballs and sliders, know that we have a miracle hitter who will step in and bring us safely home. We have Jesus, who died, fought death, and emerged from that tomb, bringing with him the miracle of life. Most of all, remember this: you are not alone, and the jeering crowd can't touch you, because you are part of a team where grace bats last. Would you pray with me? Dear loving and listening God, please keep our team together with our miracle hitter always at our side. Amen.
Amen.
I am so pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, the Reverend Eileen Jewell. She's a retired PCUSA minister and actually lives in Pinckney for the summer to be near her grandchildren, her children and grandchildren, and in Florida in the winter where she has other children and grandchildren. She'll tell you about her career as a hospital chaplain at Tampa General, right?
Yes.
Busy trauma hospital.
Yes.
And she now is stated supply, right?
Yes.
And worships here with us. Yes. So we're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I have a, and I apologize for the podium, but I have these random notes, and I don't want to just be fluttering them around in the air. So I don't necessarily always like having the wall between me and you. But so good evening, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. You have a nice crowd. I want to say that I appreciate so much what you do. I had an opportunity of having a Stephen chaplain sit with me when my husband was in surgery, and I just remember feeling cared for and loved and just watched over. I was really scared, and I just felt that comfort of having a Stephen chaplain with me, and it was just a beautiful experience. So I thank you for what you do. So as was said, I worked at Tampa General Hospital. It was a Trauma 1 hospital, which is the highest level of trauma. And my order of pastoral care priority was working the trauma center. They had a floor plan on the wall, and it showed where everybody's position was at the trauma. And so my position was to stand right next to the nurse and make sure, I watched over the families, the staff, and the patients. So my qualifications for being a chaplain, just in case anybody's interested, is that I went to McCormick Theological Seminary. I have a degree in the Master's of Divinity. I did a 3-month internship at a hospital and then a 1-year residency at the hospital. So that it took all of that just to become a chaplain. The work that I did was, as I said, the trauma bay. I attended every death, every cardiac arrest, every pastoral care request that was put in by either the patient, the staff, or the doctors. And I also performed emergency baptisms. I worked the night shift for 7 years, which was really, in a trauma bay, that's a lot. It's a lot of auto accidents, gunshots, automobile versus pedestrians. It's a lot of trauma would happen. Sometimes there would be 9 traumas at a time. And I worked it by myself, which was kind of amazing. When I look back, it's astounding. So when I started as an intern, I remember big, huge emotions. I would go to a patient's room, and they had these big emotions and big grief, and I had no idea how to deal with it. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, what do you do with this? And I would say, do you want to pray? And so I would cut off the whole process by prayer. They didn't have to process any of their emotions because I didn't know how to process that type of emotion. It was just so big. So I had a Korean intern. When I became a resident, I had a Korean intern that I was shadowing. And he introduced himself. He said, I'm an intern. He said, this is my boss. And the patient was there because she had a serious attempt at suicide. And the intern said to him, I just need prayer. I just need you to pray for me. And he said, tell me what the problem is and then I'll pray for you. And I was like, oh my gosh. And sure enough, did she not pour out every single thing that was going on for her? And I thought, wow, that was a lesson for me in being direct with people. I don't know about that direct, but being direct with people and asking them to give me an idea of what's going on here first. She just wanted to pray and get past everything else. Just pray, that's the solution, don't need anything else. And I realized my mistake when I watched my intern be so direct with her. And I think part of it is, like, I was raised to be really polite, And so my politeness was in the way of my being direct. And so what it taught me was to ask questions and to ask some uncomfortable questions. So I would ask things like, how are you coping with everything that's going on right now for you? And then I would be very silent, very silent. If they didn't want to answer it, they would fill in the silence with something. And usually it was an answer that would help me that would lead me to offer spiritual support, which would be to offer comfort, to offer hope, to offer peace. I would ask, what gives you strength to get through the tough times? How are you coping with your illness and your hospital stay? What's been the most difficult part of this experience for you? What is helping you through this difficult time? Then I learned I worked with different denominations. So it didn't matter what denomination I worked with, though. It doesn't matter whether you're Catholic, Protestant, not everybody likes to pray. Some people are very uncomfortable with prayer. And so then I learned to ask, do you find prayer helpful? And if they would say yes, then I would say, how can I pray for you? So I would engage them in the process of their prayer. Because I can pray for somebody, but I think I'm praying what I think they need. How can I pray for you? And then that's when a lot of times things that are going on for them would come out, which would again help me with my spiritual support in supporting that individual and dealing with their issues or whatever they were going through. I learned to read the room. So when I would walk into a room, I would engage my senses to see what is going on in this room. Who's in the room? What are the relationships between the individuals in the room? Sometimes you can pick up, oftentimes you can pick up tension or anger. Some people there's a lot of anger around illness, a lot of anger around trauma, because of the shock of the trauma, and it just brings out anger in individuals. Sometimes you could see that people were disconnected from each other. They were avoiding the subject. So reading the room. When I was in the trauma bay, I would escort families to what's called like a waiting room, kind of a waiting room. And they would wait for the doctor to come in and tell them what's going on in the trauma. And so often there was one person that was very angry, and others were grieving, crying. Some were just in denial. Everything's fine. Everything's going to be fine. And then I would walk with the doctor to the waiting room and be with the doctor as they told the family what was going on for the patient. I learned to stay close to the door because sometimes sometimes furniture would actually fly. They would just throw furniture or food or whatever, just an instant reaction to anger. I learned that when people fall to the floor, I meet them right there on the floor. Meet them right there. It's not unusual for people to fall down, especially when there's children involved. If there's a death of a child, I would set chairs up just to catch them, because it was 9 times out of 10 they were going to fall down. So, and just work with them, staying with the child, and just talking with them. A lot of times people, as you know, just need to talk and talk and talk through what has happened, this process that's going on. They just need to talk through it. It's a trauma. Any time you're in the hospital, there's a trauma in a sense. You've lost something. You're grieving your losses. You've lost future. You've lost your dreams. You're grieving. And I did have one patient that was very interesting. He was a Holocaust survivor. He and his wife were Holocaust survivors. They were Jewish, of course. And I went into the room. I read the room. The man was as peaceful as could be. They had string instrument music playing in the background. It was such a beautiful setting. And I sensed some tension between the daughter and the son and the patient's wife. I don't know exactly what it is, but because I'm reading the room, I can just sense that there's this tension. They're not talking with each other. They're not engaging or interacting. And the wife kept saying, I just don't want him to suffer. And I kept thinking, this guy is at such peace, I don't know what she's talking about. And so she kept saying it over and over, I just don't want him to suffer. And I said, well, he looks very peaceful to me. And then I asked the room, the people in the room, what is it that your faith tells you happens after death? And it completely cracked open the tension. It completely took the tension away, and they started to tell me that he is with us in our heart, he never leaves us, and I could see just the tension of the room dissipating. You know how you kind of capture the essence of what's going on, and that tension just starts to dissipate, and they find some peace. And I just remember that. It was such a beautiful, she no longer was worried about him being at peace. It was really more about her being at peace. One of the lessons that I learned or was taught was never work harder than the patient. So if you have a patient who is, yes, no, I'm fine, everything's good, you know, they're just so shut down actually, you know, they don't want to talk really, that's okay. It's okay to know that you didn't fail. It's just, you can't work harder than a patient. If you're trying and keep trying to engage and they're just not engaging, that's just the way they are. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be. And so I would let it go, and I would say, well, if you need anything, I'm available. Just let your nurse know. Things, what not to say. Things not to say. There are so many things not to say. And I've heard all of them. I heard a nurse once tell, which I know you know this, you would never say this. A nurse once told a mother whose daughter just died that she was young and she could have another one. Yeah, and I've heard so many things that I just was like, oh my gosh, how is that possible? People aren't thinking. But people are uncomfortable. They don't know what to say. And so they say a lot of really stupid things. So one is that it's just God's will. This is God's will. Another is it was meant to be. It gets better. That's not something somebody wants to hear while they're in the middle of things. They don't want to hear that it gets better. That's not where their mind is at. Everything happens for a reason. God needs another angel. This was said repeatedly in the maternity ward when somebody would lose a child. God needed another angel. And I always call it making God the bad guy. You know, like, that doesn't help. Or don't cry, he's with Jesus now. I've heard people say that, where it's like, that makes God kind of the bad guy, you know? Nothing happens in God's world by mistake. God doesn't give us more than we can handle. Well, when you're in the middle of it, it sure feels like God gave you more than you can handle. I learned that silence is your friend. A lot of silence. I should be talking less than the patient. So when somebody dies, it's okay to just be completely silent and just stand there and be a ministerial, give them the ministerial presence. That's okay. Another tool that we used was called mirroring. And that was where I might ask, there was a kind of a young gentleman whose 22-year-old son was dying of liver cirrhosis. And he kept saying, I have to get him home, I have to get him home. And the boy was not going to make it home. The young man was not going to make it home. And the father was frantic, and he just kept going on, and he was really stressed out and anxious. And I asked him, where do you find peace? And he thought, and he thought, and he thought, and first he was like, I don't find peace anywhere. And then he said to me, I found peace when I was a young man and I went to church. And he was shocked when he said it, because he had completely forgotten that he found church peaceful. So it's not my job to tell him, oh, you should go to church. I just repeated back to him, I hear that you found peace when you went to church. Yeah, I found a lot of peace. I don't know what happened. I don't know why I stopped going. So he's coming to his own realization of where he can find peace, because he's certainly going to need it. Also, touch. Like I might touch somebody's arm, or if they come in for a hug, I will give them a hug. But rubbing them on the back, rubbing their arms, doing things like that pulls them out of their emotion, and it kind of distracts them. So it's just gentle touch. I might hold a hand, give a hug, but no, I don't rub. It just, a lot of times people will give you a big hard rub on the back, or a big tapping on the back or something. It actually pulls them out of their emotion and helps them to stay away from the emotions that's going on. And our goal is to help them to get into the emotion so that we can offer comfort and hope and peace. One of the things that I learned that was actually very shocking for me was that people's theology, it didn't matter whether they were Catholic or Protestant. Sometimes in the worst case scenarios, people's deep theology comes out, and it's not necessarily something that's helpful. So very common was, God, I don't want to bother God. I don't have, like God doesn't have time. Meaning God has other things to deal with. My little problem, I don't want to take up his time for my little problem when other people have bigger problems. As though there's a shortage on God. So we would talk through, this is how we would work through their theology. I would ask, like, is this something that they teach in your denomination? Almost always they would be a little bit surprised to realize that this is nothing that is taught in their denomination. That this is something that they learned maybe as a child, that they've been carrying with them, and they have just been carrying it with them, and then when they get into trouble, then they're like, well, I don't want to bother God. I know he's got bigger problems than mine. Another one was that we can't be angry with God. I had a woman who just lost her second child, and she was furious with God, and she kept saying, I shouldn't be angry. And I think she should be angry. I think that anger is fine. God can handle anger. I don't know if I should, say should, but God can handle her anger. God is much greater than her anger. She didn't want to pray, of course. She said, I don't want to pray. I don't want to talk. I don't want to this, So another belief that I came across is that I can't pray for myself. I'm only allowed to pray for other people. These are just teachings that people had as a child, that their denominations are not teaching them that, but they've learned this in their families and somewhere along the way. But the greatest one that I came across over and over again is that God is punishing me. It was so common. I went to a young woman had a miscarriage, and she kept saying, God is punishing me. I don't know why, I don't know what I did, but God is punishing me. And I said, is this what they teach you in your denomination? Is this true for you? I mean, is this a teaching? And she just looked at me and she said, no, I have no idea where that came from. So having them reflect on their own theology that is not helpful for them is very freeing for people. So she was able to work through the fact that God wasn't punishing her, that this was just something that happens sometimes, has nothing to do with punishment. She did work through that and come out the other side of that one. When I would meet with people, they were either in denial, acceptance, or just in between. When they're in denial, really all you can do is offer empathy and patience and support, but you can't force people out of denial. I had a patient who had aspirated during surgery, and she was going to die. She was really young. She was 24 years old, and she was going to pass. And her mother and her grandmother were at the bedside, and they kept slapping her face. Come on, wake up, come on, wake up. She's just sleeping. And the doctors had called me to the bedside to try and get them out of denial. But they were so far in denial. There was no way to help them through this denial. There was nothing I could say that was going to help them through denial. I just had to allow them to be there. Eventually, they're going to have to get out of it. But this was not the day. So I just offered empathy. I offered prayer. And another mother, when her son died, started brushing his teeth, which was really stunning, just stunning. So people do really unusual things when they're in denial, and you just accept it. You just have to accept it. This is what they need to get to the next phase that they're going to. Another form of denial is when you see a lot of conflict. So there will be like a family drama, and the patient is obsessed with it, and they start going around and around in circles about this family dynamics, and they can't seem to get out of it. But a lot of that is just, I don't want to look at what's going on. Also, and there may be family dynamics going on, but it's become their obsession to where they can no longer look at what's going on for themselves. They can only look at this family drama to keep the focus off of themselves. Another one is medical dissatisfaction. So they get obsessed with medical dissatisfaction, and that's the whole conversation just starts going there, which is when I will inject some sort of question to, how are you feeling going through this? How are you coping? Like try and shift the subject, because it's just a circle that just spins out that you can't seem to stop. But that's a part of the denial. So acceptance and in-between stages, what would a peaceful end of life look like for you? That was a question I had a hard time asking. But people want to talk about end of life. They can't talk about it with their family. Parents don't want to burden their children. Husbands don't want to burden their wives. Sometimes we're the only people that they can talk to about it. So they want to say something because they're usually scared. Not always, but most of the time they're scared. It's pretty rare that I would find somebody who was actually ready to die and say, I'm ready to go. And they would say that, I'm ready to go. But just finding out, what would be a peaceful end of life for you. My father died an extremely peaceful, what we call a good death, a very peaceful death. He did ask me to be his chaplain, and I did say to him, well, the chaplain can never work harder than the patient, because my dad was very closed-mouthed. And so I couldn't be that type of chaplain for him, but he died a good death. He had all 6 of his children surrounding him. He was out of pain. We had Bible studies in his room. We played music and sang to him. It was a very peaceful death. And then after somebody dies and the family is in the room, again, there's a lot of silence because people are in their head and they're thinking, and we're making room for that and allowing them to say something if they want to. A lot of times I might say something like, tell me about your mom. And these amazing stories would come out, just beautiful stories about one had a burning cross from the Ku Klux Klan on her front yard because she was housing black people in her home, and just how brave she was. And her daughters were so proud of her. And, so they've just told this amazing story about this very brave woman. When people are kind of in between, they're only talking about their illness, I might say something like, and who are you without this illness? And then these beautiful stories come out about their lives and mothers and their work, and just to help somebody to realize, yes, you are sick, but there's more to you than just illness. And then I'm going to tell the most upsetting story, and then I'm going to tell the most beautiful story. So we don't have to agree with the life choices to provide care for individuals. But we seek the face of God in the patient and have compassion for humanity and for mental illness. So this includes substance use, child abusers, sex offenders, the unhoused, mental health issues. The most upsetting story for me was that I had a trauma of a baby come into the trauma bay, and the father had said that the baby fell off the bed. But the doctor told me that it was shaken baby syndrome. So I am the chaplain for the father. And I just had to go to a place of complete compassion to be there for him. He was absolutely devastated. He was vomiting and crying, and his wife did not know what was going on. Only the staff knew what was going on. The baby did not survive, and the father the grief was beyond even the ability for me to talk about. The grief was so deep. So I used to be the chaplain for the abusers of the children, which was very, very difficult. Very difficult. But seek first the face of God. Because this man would not have done this if he had known better, if he had been better, if he had, I can understand being angry. I understand being angry. I don't understand being that angry, but I can understand there's mental health, there's issues, and it was a very difficult process, but it was multiple times that I was a chaplain for the abuser of the children. And then my most blessed experience, and then I'm going to ask you all questions. So my most blessed experience was I was called to an emergency baptism. And when I arrived, they said that the baby's not going to make it through the night. And I arrived, and the parents were at the incubator around the baby crying. And in the room was the doctor, 2 nurses, the parents, and myself. And we were all believers in Jesus Christ. So I baptized the baby through the incubator. I put my hands through the incubator. I baptized her in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then I prayed for her. And the doctor said, "Oh, look, her numbers are going up." And the doctor said that it is not unusual for babies to respond to being baptized. Yeah, it was beautiful. So 6 months later, I continued to go to the bedside and pray for the baby. And 6 months later, she was discharged and sent home. Yeah, it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. So, God bless you in your work. God bless you in your work. Now I'm going to open the floor up, and for you who have comments on things that help you connect with patients, if you could let us know different things that help you connect with patients, or just tell me what you do. Or if you have any questions for me. Oh yeah, you need the microphone. What have you found helpful to connect with patients? Are there sayings that you rely on that kind of open the doors, or?
I didn't hear you mention for the victim of trauma or assault, okay, they get shot, whatever, that you say to the victim and their family, I'm sure you will find it in your heart to forgive the assailant.
I don't say that because I don't think they're ready.
Yeah, we had that with a pastor from another church, and her daughter was shot. The assailant checked, wanted to make sure she was dead, but she lived. Mm-hmm. And this pastor came in and he essentially said, you will find that you must forgive him.
It's awfully early.
Now, frankly, we never went back to the church. Mm-hmm. And if I had been an elder there, I would have pushed for his removal.
Yeah,
but,
it's awfully early. People aren't ready to forgive. That was incompetence.
That was ministerial malpractice, as far as I'm concerned.
A lot of times theology gets in the way of recovery and caring.
One of the things that I've had several care receivers that passed away, and your comment about listening is incredibly important. And one of them had been in a boys' choir in Chicago, and so I took the recording or the YouTube of our Easter, must have been Easter service or whatever, and every time thereafter I came back, he just said how it brought tears to his eyes and so on.
How beautiful.
And then I got a call when he was dying, and again, all I did was when I went there, it seemed like he recognized me, but I just sat there and held his hand.
Yeah.
And that's all you could do, just to be there. And
yeah, it's that presence, it's that ministerial presence. Yeah, that's beautiful. I used to carry with me a list of Bible verses for people, because there was a lot of people that are very anxious in the hospital. And so I would carry a list of, do not be anxious, do not be afraid, and then I would give it to them so that they could reflect on those types of readings when they were feeling anxious. And yeah, that's a beautiful story.
We have a wonderful Stephen minister here who does take prayers with her. She does a lot of hospital visits and takes prayers with her written so that they can not only have those words in the moment, but then have
It's
them
very
later.
helpful. Very helpful. Good job.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, having done a lot of these as well, I think it's helpful to me to have memorized a passage of Scripture that is meaningful in any situation. It could be the 23rd Psalm, it could be Psalm 121. But when you have that in your head and you can begin, even if you don't get it right, but you are seeing people in the eye around the bedside that are with you there, if you're saying a prayer or speaking to the person, we often get very caught up in our nervousness, our anxiety about whether we're going to say the right thing.
Yeah.
But it's really as you said, it's the pastoral presence. It's being right there with them. I wanted to ask kind of this group a question because from my experience with Stephen ministers, not a lot of us make visits in the hospital. But what we do have are care receivers that are making visits with family members in the hospital or will be making those. And one of the things I have found most helpful is to think about when I was in the hospital and a chaplain visited me. And I wonder who here had ever been in the hospital and had a chaplain visit them. And did you find that to be a good experience? And what was it about that made that a good experience? Because that's the kind of thing that you would be helping your care receivers to bring when they visit people that in their family are dying. So they're seeing you because their mother's in the hospital dying. So you're kind of thinking about it from that perspective. And what you've said tonight is so helpful for us to kind of bring all that together. I wanted to ask you about two things. One is the life review. The idea that sometimes when people are dying, I know that's not as likely to happen in a trauma unit perhaps,
Right.
but in hospital settings, often we're working with people on doing some kind of life review, whatever that might look like for them. And the other one is this book, and Cindy, you might have given me this book, The 4 Questions by Ira Byock. That I have found to be very helpful in talking with people too that are kind of in trauma situations or towards the end. And I'm not going to remember what the 4 questions are, but I'll look them up online. But if you look that up, Ira Byock, the 4. Are you familiar with either of those at all?
No,
Eileen?
I'm actually not. No.
Both not necessarily Christian concepts, but things that when you're visiting with people in the hospital and they know you're at that point where, as you said, that beautiful question about death, and you're the courageous one to bring that up, then from there beginning to allow them to think of those questions. I think the 4 words are, I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, and there's one more. Please forgive me. Those are the 4 things that are maybe going through your mind as you come to the end of a relationship in that particular way. So not to say too much, it's just what was on my mind as you were talking. Does somebody else have a question?
Just share an anecdote. I worked at the hospital as an interpreter for Japanese patients in lots of different situations, of course. But the one that touched me most deeply was an infant was on life support. The parents had to decide to take her off, and they gathered. The first time I met with the family and the doctor's group, they asked if they wanted a priest or a pastor or anybody, and they said no. And the next time we met, they decided they did want someone.
Good.
Okay, would you like a Buddhist or what? Oh, Christian. Well, you want Catholic or Protestant or, well, we got married in a Catholic church, so we'll do Catholic. Well, the deacon came, and the first time the deacon came and read Jesus and the children to the family. And then I was with them the night they took her off life support. And they expected the baby to die in 20 minutes. It took 4 hours.
Wow.
And we're sitting there, and they're checking her vitals every 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I finally suggested, just the parents some time alone with the baby, and they had a little 2-year-old who was playing on the floor. And I suggested, okay, tell your daughter about your family and your home and your country, and sing some of the songs to her you'd like to do. So they spent that time with her. And then when the baby passed, they called the priest in to pray. And I interpreted for the priest. And he said this wonderful, lovely prayer that baby has gone from the loving arms of her parents into the loving arms of God. But then the amusing part was, we went out in the hall and the priest said, "You said a whole lot more than I did." Well, in Japanese, when you're speaking to God, you have to use the highest form of honorifics.
Yeah.
And it has a whole lot more syllables. So it took me a lot longer to say what he had said, but I really didn't add anything to it. Didn't need to. But from the arms of the loving arms of Mom and Dad to the loving arms of God.
Wow, beautiful. That's beautiful.
I had a question. Have you, in working in the trauma unit, you've probably seen some pretty bizarre things, physical things that have happened to people.
Yes.
How do you prepare, how do you handle that?
Well, I'll be honest, after 9 years, I was diagnosed with PTSD. And I discovered that most of the people that were chaplains had PTSD and that they were in recovery for it. So I went to therapy. Yeah, because you see just the worst of the worst. The worst of the worst. And it's not something normal. Actually, my husband is here with me today because I'm afraid to drive at night now. So I was like, I'm not driving at night, you have to come with me, I mean, I'm okay driving in the day, but there's something about nighttime that scares me. And so I stay in therapy for PTSD. So, but during the whole process of being a chaplain, one of the most essential elements was taking care of myself, like extreme self-care. So that was having a schedule that was really tight. So every day it was consistent, eating at certain times, making sure I was sleeping at certain times. I worked the midnight shift, so I had to make sure I was sleeping and praying, being prayed up. That was a huge one, is being prayed up, just praying and praying and praying. So I would listen to different podcasts on prayer. I would listen to the scripture by audio. Just keep immersing myself in God. And one thing that is the greatest blessing is that I believe that God uses all things for good in some way. I don't know what it's going to be, but I do believe that somehow something comes out of this, whether that individual is now somebody that experiences loss, can now help somebody else while they experience loss. I feel like that's a blessing. I don't think that it's a good thing. I think that God uses things for goodness. So that helped me cope.
That would be one of the things I hope you would never say to me.
And I wouldn't say it to you. I would never say that to anybody because, of course, you're not ready to hear anything like that or may not believe in that.
I heard similar things like that when my adult son passed away 6 or 7 years ago. And a lot of the things you said that people would say to try to comfort you.
Yeah, they say the craziest things. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a couple things. I'm retired ear, nose, and throat surgeon, and one time it was going to be a very difficult airway reconstruction. So I went out to talk to the parents ahead of time, see if they had any questions, and they had a minister there. And the mom said, "Would you mind if he prayed for you?" And I said, "No."
Yeah.
And afterwards, I said, I really needed that.
Yeah.
And it was a very, very important thing, that we bonded because of that question and the minister. The other thing, a question for you, is did you find that sometimes parents were in a bind, that medical ethics sometimes is not played completely out in the hospital, especially a tertiary care hospital, that here's what your family member needs, you must sign this.
Yeah.
And on several occasions, I would find that you'd go talk to the parents that they want their child to have a trach. And they've been told that's what you have to do. Well, I said, well, you have a decision. You don't have to do that. And there's a 4-quadrant medical ethics thing. That's what's the medical reason to do something? What is the quality of life? What are the contextual things like insurance or family or whatever? And how do they feel? 4 things. And I said, we can go over everything, but you don't have to make the decision to proceed with this if you find that you don't want it to do that. And I've had numerous parents say, our child suffered enough. I'm glad you let me have a decision that I don't have to do it. I can do it if we feel it would be best for the child. Have you ever run into that where people feel like they're cornered and they'd like to?
I think mostly what I've run into is regarding children who are code blues. And the staff would say, do you want us to continue? Do you want us to continue? Do you want us to continue? And the parents would say, yes, do everything you can, even though it was actually hopeless. And it was disturbing the staff and the physicians. And that's really kind of where I ran into things like that, where the family would, and then I would work with the family and try and, talk with them about, they're now breaking ribs, and this is not something that is beneficial for the child, but a lot of times they would just insist on doing it over and over and over again. And that was real disturbing for everybody involved. But I didn't run into those types of ethical issues that you're referring to. Yeah.
Oh, one more. Last one.
Just one more illustration. When I was in Tokyo, I had the privilege of attending a meeting where Sister Helen Prejean spoke to a group of Japanese social workers. She's the one who was in Dead Man Walking, and she was at that time working with families of traumatized or victims. And the anger of the families was just so overwhelming. And she was talking about how she would go to these families, and for her, it was too much to handle, but God's heart is big enough to take it in. So she used the phrase, she says, I felt that I was a conduit to God, and I'd let it not stay in me, but go through and just let it go up to God. And it was a beautiful image, I thought. And one of the Japanese social workers said, well, that's fine for you, but we don't have a God. What are we supposed to do?
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've worked with people who don't have
Absolutely.
a God.
Absolutely.
And that's a very, challenging moment,
Yes.
I'm sure.
Yes, it is. It is, because the hope is, there's slim hope. It's hard to describe, but sometimes you think where's the relief ever? You don't have a God and you're on your own. And that's sad to me.
Eileen, we are so fortunate to have you in our church, and I hope if I'm in the hospital that you might end up making a visit with me.
Yeah.
Those wonderful skills. But, having done a hospital rotation, all of us Presbyterian clergy pretty much have had to do at least one unit, which would be like a intensive summer, or maybe a year long.
Oh, wow.
And unlike being in a congregation where people are around you for a while, you live with them, you know them well beyond the trauma, the pain, the loss, you get to see them to the other side, if you stay long enough, to the newness that comes after pain. And that's such a gift. But in your role, you didn't get that.
No.
As chaplains, you're in somebody's room for a couple days, maybe they leave, they go on back to Harbor Springs, you never see them again, you never know what that visit meant to them. And so when I hear you talk about these visits, I think not just about that, but you were in the most traumatic moments of these people's lives. And I want to thank you for the years that you have given, and I know it took a toll on you. But I also know that there are people that are thinking of you, that you walked into that room and helped them to get through something horrific. Yeah. And I'm so grateful that God called you to that, and I thank you for sharing it with us tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for what you do. It's very important. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sure it does.
Now, if you're on a scale of 10, I'm talking 2 or 3 for us. But
Yeah, but it still affects you greatly. It's a loss. It's a loss. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's nice that you have time to build relationships with them, and that's,